say live long, die quick. Whereas in America, we live long, die slow. Over 20 years. The three big killers in the West are cancer, heart disease, and dementia. When I was an anthropologist in the Amazon, a medical anthropologist, there were none of these illnesses there until people began to live like us, have cell phones, and eat like us, and they began to get sick and die like us. We train doctors to treat illnesses, and the shamans say illnesses don't exist. It's a collection of symptoms. Sick people exist, but illnesses do not exist. You treat the person, not the illness. What the shamans do is they treat the person and the invisible domains. And when you do that, then you can achieve profound healing. The body is the most spiritual thing in creation. So this is our task today, is to recover that natural wisdom of the body.
Alberto Villoldo, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Aaron. Good to be with you.
Yeah, man. Alberto, what, from your perspective, is the function of DMT for human health?
You want to start in the deep end of the pool, huh?
Yeah, what's going on with that?
Yeah. Wait, you want to tell us what DMT is first?
That'll be a good starting point. You want me to tell you?
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you the acronym: dimethyltryptamine, something produced when we are born, during sex, during heavy bouts of certain situations, exercise and such, before death, dream state. And I'm not sure the actual, I can put together some functions, but I'd be really curious your perspective on it.
Sure. DMT is known as Ayahuasca in the Amazon and in Miami, where you are, and in New York and London. In fact, I know more Ayahuasca sessions happening today in London and in New York than in the Amazon, where I spent years working with the shamans. But DMT is produced in the brain and is produced by the pituitary gland. So DMT is 2-dimethyltryptamine. So it's a methylated tryptamine with a couple of methyl bonds attached to it. Now, it's an analog of serotonin. It's almost identical to serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that we need for the brain to work. Now, all psychedelics, bar none, except ibogaine, all of them work on serotonin receptors in the brain. So why would the Great Spirit have created a brain full of receptors for psychedelics? You got to ask yourself that question. And DMT is ubiquitous. It's everywhere in nature. It's in horses and grasshoppers, in plants and trees and humans. It's what allows flowers to blossom. And it allows humans, I believe, to blossom as well if it's used properly. So most of us are familiar with the ingested form of psychedelics, the external psychedelics, but we never learned that we manufacture our own. And particularly when we're being born, many women, probably about 20% of women that don't have C-sections, 20% of women that have natural births, have ecstatic births because there's a burst of DMT happening inside the brain where suddenly you're having a cosmic experience and you hear somebody screaming and you wonder who that is and you realize it's you delivering a baby. Also with great sex, not with bad sex, with great sex, you have this burst of DMT. When you're dreaming, the brain produces psychedelics. That's why when you're having an amazing dream, you don't go, "Ah, this is just a dream." Or when you're about to be eaten by a crocodile in a dream, you don't think dismissively, "This is just a dream." It's real. You're tripping because you're tripping. So this is why dreams are so real. But we just with minute doses of this amazing substance that the pineal gland produces. So the trick here is that we are deficient in the serotonin. We're in the substrates that are used to manufacture DMT. And if you're not producing DMT, the psychedelics, and feeling one with all of creation and experiencing the sisterhood and brotherhood of humanity with all creatures, then you're producing a bunch of stress hormones, which are adrenaline and cortisol, lower brain, that keeps you in fight or flight, living in scarcity, not having enough. The I remember one time I was driving with my kids, and we had a nice car. We had a lovely car. It was an older Mercedes. And they said to me, Dad, why can't we have a nice car like the neighbors, like they had a Ferrari? So you never have enough. You always live in fear. You live in scarcity no matter what you have if you're producing the stress molecules. But if you can quiet those down, the production of the stress molecules, and you can clear your pineal gland, which tends to calcify with products that we get in our drinking water. Um, if you can decalcify it, and you can do that in about 2 weeks by drinking clean water, um, then the brain will begin to produce DMT, and you'll have this experience of oneness. Now, if you don't have the substrates, if you don't have the brain chemistry, it doesn't matter how long you meditate for. You're not going to have a blissful experience.
I said pineal gland, which I think maybe is a common misconception that I hold, and you said pituitary gland. Where's DMT actually produced
The
in the
DMT
brain?
is produced by the pineal gland.
Oh, I heard you say pituitary gland.
The
Maybe I
pituitary
I must have
produces
misheard.
the stress chemicals. So the pituitary is lower brain, fight or flight. We needed that for a long time. Especially if you were a woman, because the tiger would get close to the home, the village, and the guy was out running, but the mother had two babies with her. So she had to trigger fight or flight. And so this is one of the reasons, men primarily die. They die younger than women, 5 or 6 years younger, primarily from heart conditions. Women die primarily from Alzheimer's, mental conditions, because they're so predisposed to be able to flee and to fight. And if you've ever been married and had an argument, you know that you're already lost before the argument begins with a woman, because that part of their brain is so much more survival oriented. But you got to get to the higher brain, to the pineal. Add a couple of methyl groups to your serotonin, and you got DMT.
What is the evolutionary function of the pineal gland? Is it evolution?
It's
Is the
evolution.
evolutionary function of the pineal gland evolution itself?
Yeah, it's designed to get us high, to be
Why is that
creative.
valuable to the human?
We can discover technology. We discover artificial intelligence. You cannot do that without the brain producing these psychedelics that help you think outside the box. So
Interesting.
what happened evolutionarily, it's kind of a long story if you want to get into it.
Please.
So what happened is that about 300,000 years ago, we had two chromosomes basically come together to create chromosome number two. We have 23 chromosomes from mom and 23 from dad. That's why 23 and me, you get 23, the genetic code from both parents, but we come from the apes. So we have 46 chromosomes, 23 and 23, but the apes have 48. That's why we cannot breed with apes, other than the fact they don't find us very attractive. But they have 48, we have 46. So what happened is that two chromosomes fused together. And we know they did because at the end of chromosomes, you have telomeres, which are these little plastic tips that keeps the chromosome from unraveling. But the chromosome number two has telomeres in the outside and in the middle. So we know that this chromosome fused, and this is chromosome number two that accelerated the development of the higher brain and of the pineal gland. And it came on board about 50,000 years ago. 50,000 years ago, archaeologists call it the Great Leap Forward, because technologies that had not changed in a million years changed very rapidly in the space of a couple hundred years. Hunting technologies, fish hooks, knitting needles, shoemaking, hides for cover, but most amazingly, art. You get the cave art at Lascaux and Altamira from 50,000 years ago. They had to descend a mile underground to draw in the inside of caves, these amazing scenes. Suddenly, art appears, spiritual experiences appear, pineal gland develops, psychedelics, endogenous ones appear. And we used to be able to produce them, but today we don't get the substrates. The building blocks are not in our food anymore. So even if you can decalcify your pineal gland, you can still, we're still not getting the building blocks, which is the building block for serotonin, and our brains are broken. So we're not able to have these experiences of oneness. So we're not getting enough tryptophan. So if you can supplement with the 5-HTP, for example, before you go to bed at night, or with L-tryptophan in your smoothie in the morning, you're getting the substrate to produce serotonin. And then, if you can lower your stress hormones by breathing exercises, meditation, then the higher brain will kick in. The first thing it'll do is take serotonin and turn it into melatonin so you can sleep. And that's the pineal gland, higher brain. And then, if you're sleeping enough, it'll take melatonin and tweak it a little bit more, add a couple of methyl bonds to it, and turn it into dimethyl serotonin, dimethyltryptamine, which is serotonin analog. That's kind of the brain chemistry to it.
Is it overly simplistic to suggest that fear and separation is at the root of disease for humans?
I believe that, but there's no science to back that up. But every shaman that I've worked with in the world believes that. Everything, it's interesting. I speak at a lot of longevity conferences. I was keynoting at biohacking in Austin a couple of weeks ago at Dave Asprey's conference. And everybody into the longevity space, which means all of us, but everybody in the longevity conferences is terrified, not of death, because we're not afraid of death, but we're afraid of dying, especially the way people die in America. So the shamans in the Amazon say, live long, die quick. Whereas in America, we live long, die slow, over 20 years. So at the root of all illness is fear. And fear triggers fight or flight. But today we can't run and we can't fight. We're paralyzed. We think we cannot make a difference in our government. And I tell people, you can vote with what you have at the end of your fork, with the food you eat, with the products you buy. But what happens when you're paralyzed is that you're flooded with the stress molecules. You create psychosomatic disease, shortens your life. If you can get to the higher brain and have that experience of oneness, you create psychosomatic health.
What is trauma and where does it exist in the body? And
What
what are the
are you
implications
saving
in
all
one's
these hard
life?
questions? Are you saving all these hard questions for me? What is trauma? Where does it live in the body? The body keeps score. We know that, right?
Uh-huh.
And so trauma is your inability to create context in a situation. See, there are no, people think that there are traumatic events. There are no traumatic events. There are only traumatic experiences.
Mhm.
So you and I can have the same event happen, and I'll be traumatized, but you'll take it as a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
This is what they train people in special forces groups to do. And no matter what happens, why is this happening for you instead of to you? If it happens to you, you take no responsibility. Why is this happening to me? Why am I a victim? Why is this happening for me? What is spirit offering me a lesson that I can't quite figure out? And if you can do that, then you don't have trauma. You have shock and you get out of it, but it doesn't get installed in the nervous system. So trauma is not what actually happened, but the stories that we wrap around what we believe happened. That's kind of a different approach, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's the way that it is, but I think that it's convenient to be placed into. I've heard you mention a shamanic concept, or at least termed by the shamanic world, of the disempowerment triangle, which I've heard this in other worlds as well. I've just heard you mention it this way, but it's the victim, and the perpetrator and the rescuer dynamic. And as long as a person is in that place, it's very convenient to be in a place of a role of a victim, because if you're in the role of a victim, then you can forego responsibility. The caveat with that is if you are placed into that, if you place yourself, you choose a story or narrative of victimhood, you will also come into stasis with any potential growth. So you're foregoing growth, you're foregoing evolution, but you temporarily get to kind of discard the responsibility of kind of like engaging in your experience. And yeah, I like the definition of but if you're in the place of trauma happened to me, what does that happen? What happens to, am I misspeaking? If I have the story that trauma happened to me, what does that do to a person compared to what would be another option?
Well, let's go back just for a moment to the victim place. See, the victim is, from an evolutionary perspective, if you're a victim, you get eaten, you become lunch. And this is happens also in our world. If you're a victim, you continue to be victimized. People can spot you. The predators can spot you. You become a mark, a target, and then they can smell you.
There's research about, I wrote that about that in my book that I wrote 6 7 years ago. But they actually did that with inmates that were in jail for violent crimes. They showed them pictures of different people and who they'd be most likely to, mug or whatever. And the most consistent thing wasn't whether they were a male or a female or their race or any of that. It was their body language. And if a person felt moved in an assertive way, in a way where they felt confident, where they stood upright, they knew the direction of which they were going, they would be someone not to mess with. But it's the wandering, kind of aimless, kind of collapsing person. That's where the parasites are attracted. And I think that becomes an interesting type bridge into like the shamanic world and the invisible world as well.
Totally, totally. The invisible parasites and the visible ones. If you're bad enough, you end up marrying one of them. And then you continue to be victimized in this horrible relationship where you're abused, where you and since we live in a society of victims where you even get rewarded for being a victim, and society's interested in prosecuting the perpetrators and not empowering the victims necessarily. That's changing a little bit, but it's we need to be able to rewrite our stories and become the storyteller instead of the story. So we're not stuck in a role typecast by our story. We become the authors of the story and not another actor in a poorly written script. So yeah, we become our stories. The stories we tell others and the stories we tell ourselves, especially, we become those stories.
What does a shaman do? What form of medicine does a shaman, how do you describe the work of a shaman?
When I call myself a neuro shaman, and these people say, "Well, why are you a shaman?" It says, "It's Doctor Shaman, please." Oh, and that's because in the West we still have the schism between the body and the mind. Think you're a shaman, you should work with feathers. I do. I have my feathers. I work with my feathers and rattles, but I'm also a brain scientist. So we are the body mind. The body is the most spiritual thing in creation. Biology is extraordinarily spiritual. The visible and the invisible world flow into each other. And this is what David Bohm is a Nobel Prize winning physicist and also a neuroscientist, and he called it the implicate order versus the explicate order that we can explain the world of form. The implicate order is the invisible world from which the visible world emerges. And the physicists know this. But still, we like to keep that schism. What do shamans do versus what do doctors do? Well, for one thing, they don't have a disease care system, we don't have a healthcare system. We have a disease care system. in the West. We train doctors to treat illnesses. And the shamans say illnesses don't exist. That's a collection of symptoms. Sick people exist, but illnesses do not exist. You treat the person, not the illness. And so, what the shamans do is they treat the person in the visible and the invisible domains. And when you do that, then you can achieve profound healing. Not only that, you practice prevention. The three big killers in the West are cancer, heart disease, and dementia. When you when I was an anthropologist in the Amazon, a medical anthropologist, there were none of these illnesses there until people began to live like us, have cell phones, and uh, and eat like us, and they began to get sick and die like us. So this is our task today: is to recover that natural wisdom of the body. And you don't do it only mentally, you don't do it only energetically, you do it by what you eat, by how you forgive, by how you begin to think, why is this happening for me instead of why is this happening to me? Get out of the victim, go into hero's journey. And this is what shamans do. When I have a new patient coming into my office, I need to see a golden Buddha walking into my office. If I see a liver cancer, that's what I'm going to find. That's what Heisenberg told us. You know, wherever you look for the electron is where you're going to find it. Wherever you look for reality, that's where you're going to bump into.
Is there any dis-ease a human experiences that is purely material, objective matter, or could all diseases be treated in the invisible spiritual realms?
Now, disease needs to be treated at the physical level.
Hmm.
Health needs to be created at the invisible level. If it's already manifested in the body, see, the notion is that we have these, what they call stale chi in acupuncture, the Chinese call stale chi, these energy bundles in your field that are that are stale, that are not in motion, that are not dynamic, karmic, nutritional trauma stored in these stale bundles of energy that are trying to work their way out of your system. But you don't want them to work their way out through your system, through your biology, because then they will gravitate to the weakest organ and try to work their way out of your what we call disease. We want to work it out energetically, so we don't have to somatize it, because it will somatize. So every illness is seen as the best attempt that the body knows to try to create health.
I've had Gabor. You have to know Gabor, right? Gabor Mate.
Yeah,
Have
yeah,
you guys
yeah.
connected? Yeah. Him and some other folks in those realms around discussing the evolutionary function of holding on to um, trauma in the body. Like, do you have a sense? It kind of boggles my mind a little bit because it seems like the body would just want to heal and repair, but it seems like the body also needs to go through a certain arc or process to be able to discharge the energy that it would accrue during some kind of quote unquote like traumatic experience. Why is the What does the body need to be able to process and discharge energy that could create disease? Does the body need to cry? Does the body need to scream? Does the body need to be seen and heard and held? Does the body need more 5-HTP and sunlight? Like, why can't the body just be like, I'm holding a bunch of charge that's creating tension in my diaphragm and my pelvic floor and creating stasis and potentially disease. This is bad for my system. I'm just going to let this go. But instead, it's like the human needs to go on the hero's journey in a sense and face those energies. And, it kind of becomes like, it's kind of complex in a way, like coming back into ease within the body.
The from an evolutionary perspective, higher order organisms evolve according to their ability to export entropy. So entropy is the tendency towards chaos and disorder. So the more capable you are of exporting entropy, the more successful you are um, as a biological being. But this also happens in a city. The more success, like New York City or Miami, more successful you are at getting rid of garbage. New York City at 10 o'clock, the most important people are the garbage collectors, because there are all of these black bags piled up in the sidewalk. You got to export the garbage, the toxins, the entropy, the disorder, the chaos. If you don't export it, then the disorder settles internally. And so, what are the strategies for exporting entropy? That's really and detoxification is one of them, exercise, sweating, saunas, everything that eating correctly. Um, if you have a lot of entropy in your gut, entropy is disorder, chaos. So if you have parasites, or if you've taken a lot of antibiotics and you're nuking your gut flora, you got a lot of entropy happening in your gut. You're gonna it doesn't matter where it is in the body. So the minute that we begin to identify disease, it's already 3 steps down the line from that original disorder that is going to express itself through the weakest system. So we got to be able to export entropy, beginning with our entropic emotions, which are the chaotic emotions. So that's where the crying and but that's not exporting it. That's reliving it, and frequently will re-injure instead of releasing. So it's complicated. That's why in shamanic societies, when you have trauma, they frequently will go through a symbolic death ceremony. That this old person, this old Aaron, this old Alberto has died. Okay, let's give it a nice burial. Thank you, Alberto. You did well, but let's be reborn. It's kind of the same thing that happens when you're 4 years old and you fall into the pool and you swallow some water, and mom takes you out, cuddles you, hugs you, and then puts you back in the pool again. Okay, let's re-imprint that. So we got to be able to export chaos, export entropy out of our system. That's why if you're not pooping, if you're not peeing, if you're not exporting waste emotions, waste energy, low-grade energy, low-grade information, cellular signaling that is low grade is going to create disease. You got to be able to export that. So you got to upgrade your mitochondria. You got to upgrade your signaling systems in the body. It's all about information, about wisdom in the body.
What
You
about
know,
some of? Oh, sorry, did I
oh,
interrupt?
the final thought is that as we know, we used to think of food as calories, as energy. No, food is information. It's going to be flipping on the genes for health or for disease. So you've got to export the low quality info. Get it out of your system, including the notion that you can now make a difference in the world.
How do we begin to export the entropy of our lineage?
you know, this is the same trauma that we carry in our bodies. We carry the the wounds of our ancestors. We carry them, and that's why in Asia you have, in particularly in the Himalayas, but also you find it all through Asia, the creating of an ancestor altar. So you need to see our lower brain with the pituitary, the stress hormones, not the higher brain with the pineal. The lower brain feeds on sugar, not on fats like the higher brain. And the lower brain needs rites of passage, needs ceremony in order to change. If you don't have ceremony, that lower brain will not change, will cling on to old belief structures, to the old ancestral drama and trauma. And, uh, and then you continue to repeat that. And that's why where you find the most amount of ceremony anywhere is in the military, because you need to get people through these rites. So just you get little ribbons and stripes and pins and people saluting each other and parading, and full of ceremony. Graduation, you need to, marriage. You're not a single man anymore. I got a friend of mine that got married recently, and he thinks that this this idea of being single ending applied only to his wife, not to him. So you got to go through the rite of passage, and that's requires that you honor the ancestors, not hold them responsible for the. Um, I'll give you a personal story. My family were Spanish Jews that were kicked out of Spain, 1492. So we ended up in Cuba, and then we got kicked out of Cuba, and then so the story of being kicked out of places is kind of a family of uh, lineage that you inherit, and at the same time, it also has a silver lining. Okay, we're kicked out of Egypt. We get to the Red Sea. You know, you got to go into the nose deep into the water before the waters part. You can't just pray and ask for a miracle. Spirit will test you, and you got to transform those stories into the courage and to find the silver lining in them, and that becomes your story.
What is soul recovery? And is that something that, how would you describe the concept of soul recovery to a 12-year-old in the United States?
I'm making notes, Aaron, to so when friends of mine get invited to your show, I'm going to caution them they're going to get all the hardest questions that nobody else asked them. So the it's the saddest thing. We have an orphanage that my organization supports. We have an orphanage, a couple of different ones, one in Peru, but we have one in Nepal, way in the back of Nepal next to Tibet, and it's an orphanage that trains Tibetan medical doctors. So they take the orphans and they show them how to pick the herbs since the age that they can walk, select the herbs, and they turn them into Tibetan medical practitioners, the smart ones. The less smart ones, they get to go to the monastery. But the um, and is when I was there, I was so surprised to see the children that had just come into the orphanage had this vacant look in their eyes.
Hmm.
They were not there. They're 6 year olds who had left. And then after a year or 18 months, they would recover their essence, their zest for life, their enthusiasm, their innocence, and they would play again. The ability to play, and having been born in Cuba and fled during a revolution, there were bombs falling in the airport near where we lived. It was scary. I remember being under the bed because there was gunfire happening outside. And many years later, and I forgot to play. I stopped playing at about the age of 9. Um, and it wasn't until my mid 20s when I had a soul recovery or soul retrieval done to me that I recovered this 12-year-old that had been under a bed for 20 years,
Wow.
that was still hiding, that was afraid of losing his life, losing his loved ones. And when you recover, then you trust life again. You know the universe has your back.
I've had similar experiences in like therapy, and I've done ayahuasca a bunch of times and different types of psychedelics and stuff. But therapy has actually been some of the most impactful. Um, it's language and semantics, but like soul recoveries or soul integrations for myself, and the realization that there's aspects of myself that are frozen in time as a 5-year old or 17-year old or 12-year old, and I keep on growing my body and I keep on compensating with all of the ways that I compensate through life, and I appear as an adult, but there are in fact frozen, unintegrated, unprocessed aspects of myself that I carry every day of my life.
Precisely. And then if you were lucky, you do what Woody Allen said, that you turn your pathology into shtick. And and many of us do that. We compensate. It's a compensatory mechanism. We're scared, so we act brave and courageous, and we're terrified, and we attract people that are going to attract, that are going to make us even more terrified. Um, so yeah, this making the soul whole. This is at the core of all the great spiritual traditions, that you need to make your soul whole and develop a strong ego. Don't try to transcend it early. Don't put your ego aside until you get one, till you can integrate those wounded parts and find that they become the source of your compassion.
How does a westernized person have a sense of the level of integration or wholeness of their soul?
Well, Carl Jung described it as the shadow, that the shadow were those parts of ourselves that we had not integrated. So we keep recognizing it in the other, the negative shadow, the dark shadow, or the positive shadow we project onto the movie stars, our heroes, the superheroes, and then our faults and our flaws and our wounds we also project onto the other. And until we can recognize that we're projecting our wounds and attracting people with a similar wound in the hope of maybe healing, true healing does not happen. So we understand that, and for the shamans have a really good description of that, that everything you bump into in the world is your unhealed parts coming in the form of the other to offer you an opportunity to heal. And I don't want to heal that way anymore. It's too complicated, you know. Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, said that if you don't heal it, you end up marrying it. So we've all tried that. It's a painful path, you know. Um, so this is the task we have to heal. But the trap is that we think that we can now make a difference until we're healed.
Mhm.
And the reality of it is that you're not going to heal until you begin to make a difference.
Are we addicted to who we believe ourselves to be? And is that problematic? Or is that supportive to cultivate the ego, like you're saying?
You know, it helps to look at it from the brain chemistry side. So we know that DMT ayahuasca is a serotonin that's been methylated, right? Serotonin. It's a feel good. They call it a happy molecule. Um, Dopamine. You know, serotonin is you smoke one cigarette, go, whoa, that was nice. Dopamine is you smoke a cigarette, you go, I need another one. It's addiction, it's addictive. And today, our online engagements and even our entertainment is dopamine based. That's one of the advances in Chat GPT 5 is that they said, hey, we're going to make this less addictive. We're going to stop encouraging engagement because we're losing people. They're 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 more intimate with their Chat GPT than they are with their spouses. It's because of the addictive component. So when dopamine is engaged, which is online engagement, which is um, if you look at one of the movies from 75 years ago, Gone with the Wind, or one of my favorites, Casablanca, you know, and the you see that the takes are 3 to 4 minute long, cameras following the actor, there are no cuts. Actors had to memorize lines. Now you have cuts every 3 to 4 seconds because that's dopamine engagement. You find that the mind, we cannot meditate today because that's quieting the mind. The mind needs to be dopamine engaged. We're creating neural circuitry, loops in the limbic ancient fight or flight brain that are dopamine dependent. When we got to switch into a serotonin, chill. But if you want to be successful, you want to build an empire, build up. You got to be dopamine driven.
Something that I wanted to ask you that I think, a lot of people have heard is with the discovery of ayahuasca, it's a blend of the ayahuasca vine with another plant leaf called chacruna. Is that correct? Chacruna, I
Chakruna,
believe.
yeah.
Yeah. And if you put them together, then you can have these, incredible journeys. But them individually, you will not. There are, from what I read, around 40,000 plus different species of plants in the jungle. I might be way off on the 40,000, but there's a lot of freaking plants out there. And the suggestion from indigenous people of how they discovered the plants to pair together is the plants told us or the jungle told us. That doesn't compute with a Western mind. How do you convey that to a 12-year-old in the United States?
You know, the 12-year-old gets it. It's the 40-year-old in the United States that just does not get it.
That's a good
They want me
point.
to explain it in a language that they can understand. And the problem is that if you don't talk to plants, you're not like I speak to plants. I speak, you probably take probiotics like most of us do.
Well,
I
yeah.
talk to my probiotics. They're alive. They're little bugs, good little bugs. I said, hey, I'm part of the solution. I'm not part of the problem. Help me.
Mm,
So the thing is that God has not stopped speaking to us through the plants, through the clouds, through the river. God is still speaking to us. We're the ones who stopped listening.
mm,
And so I'm not going to frame this language in a way. I mean, I can talk about the brain science. And by the way, you don't need to mix the chacruna only with the ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is an MAO inhibitor that allows the chacruna to go into the bloodstream, which is the DMT. You can take methylene blue, which is also an MAO inhibitor, and you'll suddenly have your serotonin that's in your gut going into your bloodstream, which is fantastic.
mm.
So there are many foods. Ripe cheese is an MAO inhibitor. That's why you don't eat a bunch of blue cheese before you do an ayahuasca ceremony because it's going to be really, really intense.
Is
Um,
that why? Is that why if you take lemon juice, that can be kind of like a parachute cord that can take you out of the journey?
yeah, lemon juice, or you can even, or um, electrolytes.
Mm,
Vitamin C with electrolytes will do the. But you got to be careful with serotonin syndrome, which is what it's called. When you have too much of the chacruna, the DMT going into your system, and your heart rate starts going up, and because so this can be life threatening actually. So you're advised to not be on an SSRI if you go into the jungle to do ayahuasca because that's a serotonin enhancer, basically. Um, Zoloft, the psych meds. Um, but see, we were primed to produce these natural psychedelics. But today, the amount of tryptophan in a green pea is a quarter of what it was 100 years ago because green peas, with many other foods, are now being bred for sweetness and not for tryptophan content, which is more in the bitter side. We bred lettuce. If you buy a head of lettuce in the market, it doesn't taste like anything. So, but if you buy arugula, it has that bite, a nice bite to it, and that's because we're still kind of adapting to the arugula. We're still breeding it for that sharp taste. And the minute you do that, you're beginning to breed out the tryptophan. And tryptophan needs to get into the brain for the brain to manufacture serotonin and for the pineal gland to be able to methylate serotonin into um, DMT or into psilocybin.
What What do you think happened for humanity to go into a direction of scientism and materialism, and to start to distrust um, that which is more mystical?
You know, the head of the chief editor of the most prestigious medical journal in the world called the Lancet, coming out of the UK, the most ancient, most prestigious medical journal, stated in an open letter in their journal that half of the articles that they publish are bogus. They just don't know which half. Where the authors are, they're cherry picking the results. They are adapting their hypotheses to what they. So half of the science is bogus. So the problem is that it's become a religion, materialistic science. The only science you can really trust is what the physicists tell you. But if you're looking at the medical science, is not science. It's art. Doctors are artists. They try to be scientific. but half of the stuff that they're prescribing is useless or doing more harm than good. So you have to become your own chief scientist. And if you're strictly a materialist, you're going to miss 90% of the fun.
Yeah, I wonder. It seems almost like excessive materialism and scientism and reductionism would lead to or perpetuate loneliness, because it'd be like a feeling of separation compared to another perspective of like, there's this interconnected morphic resonance and the world is a hologram and I'm connected to all things and all information and future, past and present and ancestors. And it's kind of like like you let that sink in. It's like, it's almost like a hug.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I love about Gabor when I've been in programs with him. He always shows up wearing his shaman scarf. Have you seen that? How he always wears, his
Yeah,
ancient
yeah,
shaman
yeah,
scarf. I
yeah,
got
that's
mine over here too. Um,
funny.
so the magical world is so much more interesting.
It really is. But both are valuable, and that is the issue, and that's why spiritual people can be annoying, because they jump the gun and they're like, oh, all the science and all that stuff is nonsense, and then excessively scientific dogmatic people in either direction, I think, are kind of annoying, because I think the reality is there's benefit to both and all. And but I see the dogmatism going in the direction of science and separation and materialism and all that stuff just feels a little sterile, like dry, like makes me sad.
Yeah, we need a little bit of woo woo in our life, but it cannot be all. The science is magical, biology is spiritual, and
Right.
but if you shut off to if you think that you can cure your vitamin D deficiency by chanting Om Namah Shivaya, you're not going to do it. Take the supplement, know what helps the body to regulate. And but I'm really fascinated by this whole longevity. Um, it's being driven primarily by the baby boomers, and they're butting up against the realization that the mortality rate is still 100%. You know, and they're trying to be so much of an outlier from the bell curve that they're not going to die. Well, this is what the shamans of the Americas and of the Himalayas were so good at. They were map makers of infinity. They charted the journey beyond death. Said, yeah, that's where and even if you don't believe in it, just in case, it may be worth looking at the maps.
How I appreciate you entertaining these very direct questions, by the way. How would you explain voodoo to a Western skeptic?
To a 12-year
And
old Westerner?
either or, just someone that's kind of like, voodoo. I don't know
Yeah.
about all that.
Yeah. I mean, voodoo is rampant in the corporate world. They don't stick needles in dolls like they do in Haiti, but they know that, um, when you're at work and a colleague says, Aaron, are you okay? Are you feeling all right?
Right.
Yeah, that's black magic.
Hmm.
When you go to your doctor and you get a diagnosis, that's sorcery because they're plugging you into a bell curve and they're saying, hey, I'll tell you, I have one student, a graduate of our training program. What I do today is to train modern shamans in 30-day training program online or residential at our center in Chile. And this graduate called me up. Uh, she's a medicine woman, but she's also a very high-ranking officer in the Navy that works at the Pentagon. So they found a tumor in her brain the size of a golf ball. So she said, "What am I going to do?" And I said, "Well, go to a neurologist." Number one, and they said, "Yeah, it's not operable." She went to a neurologist. They took films. They found it. Can't operate it. Can't get it out. I said, "Go see my friend, Dr. David Perlmutter." And I think you've had David on your show
Yeah, he's a good
also.
friend. Yeah,
Yeah,
I love David.
David and I wrote a book together called Power Up Your Brain, where science and and the invisible world meet. So David says, "Yeah, this doesn't look good." Went to another brain surgeon, can't do anything about it. We started working together, and she started future tracking, finding a destiny line where she was tumor free. And instead of instead of past tracking, which is what you would do for soul retrieval, where you want to find an incident or a time in the past that derailed your destiny. Here she was future tracking. That's what shamans always do. They take the fishermen to where the fish are going to be the next day, or the hunters to where the buffalo will be the following week. They future track. The the Osage people in North America are the best example of that. They bought the piece of land from the US government sight unseen because their shaman said, the mother will take care of us here. Barren land, government laughed at them. They bought the subsurface rights, the Osage, full of petroleum, had all these black pools of poison. That was before they discovered the petroleum could fuel cars, became the wealthiest people in America. So she future tracked and found a future healed state that she could anchor into her destiny line. And the future began to inform her to reach back like a giant hand and pull her towards that. And it did. I mean, within 3 months, she was feeling better, recovering vision and movement, and went in for another check. And the same radiologist took films and she said, there's nothing there. It's gone. These things don't just go away. And she said to him, yes, they do. I'm not buying into that belief system. Yes, they do go away. And she called me up and she said they want to do another set of films. I said, go do another set of films, but know that you're clear, you're healed. Second set of films, nothing. And it turns out that 2% of medical healings are spontaneous remissions. 2%. That's huge. If you live in that world where the improbable is commonplace, then you can have an extraordinary life that's not ruled only by statistics.
How does a westernized reductionist mind begin to become more open to the improbable or the impossible?
Well, I think ayahuasca is certainly a good starting point. I'm not advocating the use of it. I'm saying that you can generate your own through meditative practices, through stopping to don't drink fluoride. Filter your water. Get the fluoride out of your water that calcifies the pineal gland. And of course, people say, well, there's not enough science that really says that. Fluoride doesn't help with your teeth. And if you wanted to help with your teeth, get toothpaste with fluoride, not drinking water with fluoride. You don't have teeth in your stomach, right? Or your GI tract. This whole fluoride thing is a myth, it's a waste product, chemical industrial waste product that calcifies your pineal. So you don't have a bunch of people in your country that are having experiences of oneness and love and communion with life and wanting to become earth keepers instead of earth parasites.
Could you share? I know we're running up on time. Would you be able to share the mechanics of how a person could start to future track or past track, if that was the language that you used?
Yeah, we're future tracking all the time, actually. There's nothing in science or in physics that says that time flows in one direction only. All of the laws of physics apply equally well if time flows backwards or forwards or simultaneously backwards and forwards. So we're future tracking through the set of beliefs that we have about life, about what our sacred journey is throughout life, through this life, about how the universe will respond to me. And if you can change those belief structures that operate in the ancient limbic brain, you need a rite of passage to bring you out of the predetermined, the preordained. I'm the product of my genetics or my family story into the synchronous world, not the causal, the cause and effect, but the synchronous where the improbable happens. You change those core beliefs, the universe begins to mirror that back to you. We're already doing that, but we're using a flawed database.
You just said something that seemed profound for me personally, of our relationship to the universe, and it created a visual or a sensation for me of almost like I am in a romantic relationship with the universe. And my relationship, do I trust the universe? Do I judge the universe? Do I run away? Do I lean in? Do I surrender? Like if it seems like if you can begin to come into relationship, or at least be able to have observation or awareness of how you relate to life itself, perhaps the constituents around life will start to shift in suit as well.
You answered your question so much more elegantly than I could have. Thank you. Absolutely. And to add to that relationship, we need to heal the fear within us. Need to heal the fear, and the greatest fear is the fear of death. So my practice is to make death my lover, not my enemy, my lover. It allows me to appreciate every breath, every flower, every moment, even the painful ones. Ah, death is my lover because I know through my work with the medicine plants and through my practice, spiritual practice, that the journey is infinite. So I want to live every breath, every moment. And there's a meditation that I just want to share that I learned from the shamans, from a shaman, very fine teacher who is a breathing practice where when you inhale, you say to yourself quietly, I am. As you exhale, you repeat to yourself in your mind, my breath. I am my breath. I am my breath. So when you take that last breath and release it, you'll ride that breath into the beyond. And
Thank you so much,
thank you
man.
so much, Aaron. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to have been with you.
I really enjoyed this conversation. Um, where can people you? I think you're really brilliant. I really appreciate. I'm very grateful that you exist. I'm really grateful that you spent some time with me and us today. Where can people go from here to go deeper into your work?
I have a new book called Grow a New Brain because my book before that was Grow a New Body. Shamanic and science meet because you grow a new body every 7 years, but you grow a new brain every 22 days. And in order to change your mind, you got to change your brain. And this book is called Grow a New Brain. It's shamanic and cutting edge science that will allow you to grow that higher brain of communion where you can dream the world into being your world, your health into being, and not just rely on your supplements. So and also my website is the4winds.com, where we do our training programs, where we train modern shamans.
Amazing. Thank you, man. Something I appreciate about you in this moment and connecting. People can say things, and knowledge is a thing, and it's valuable, and it's a tool. But the way that a person makes you feel, I think, is of far greater impact than like the words or the information or whatever that they present. And my personal experience in communicating with you is a deep feeling of just now a greater sense of ease, fulfillment, and like peace from this conversation. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Blessings to you and to all of our viewers, listeners. Remember that we're on a great journey right now. Make the best of it, huh?
Amazing. Thanks much. Thank you all for tuning in. That is it. That is all. I'll see you next week. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed that episode, you might also enjoy this episode over here, as well as this one over here. Thank you for subscribing. Appreciate you. I'll see you in the next video.